Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Kerwin, and on today's episode, I have Lois Maharg. Lois is a journalist who's written the book called The Savvy Insomniac, A Personal Journey Through Science to Better Sleep, and she's written this book to help understand insomnia and what can be done to help it. Thank you, Lois, for coming on today.
Hi, Gary. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. So, I stumbled across you with Insomnia, and I was listening to some of the interviews that you've done, and I've got your book on Kindle now. And yeah, I just love the information that you were sharing about the sleep disorder insomnia, and that's why I wanted you to come on today to educate people. So, I think if we begin with, would you mind just explaining to people why you've got such a keen interest in insomnia?
Sure. I guess I would say that I've never been a really good or long sleeper. Even when I was a little girl, of course, my sister was 2 years younger than I was, but my mother was putting us down to naps together, and I would find that I could never sleep. And likewise, in my 4-year-old kindergarten class, when the rest of the class was sleeping in the mid-morning, I was just really wide awake and really resented having to take naps. So as an adolescent, I recall slumber parties when I would be listening to my friends sawing logs and I'd be still up. And then in college is when I really started to think of it as a problem, because I was living in a dorm, and of course dorms are noisy and crowded and light, and nobody's, observing any kind of sleep hygiene there. And so I think it just kind of got off there. And ever since then, really, until my late 40s, I was what I would call a guerrilla sleeper, sort of sleeping when I could, which wasn't that often, and wondering why was everybody else growing up and being able to sleep, whereas I felt like an adolescent, really, not able to get into any kind of a rhythm. So I thought, well, after decades of suffering with this problem, I would check into it further. And that's what got me started on my research for my book.
Yeah, so you know from a personal experience of what insomnia is like, and I guess that with your research, that was much easier for you to relate to when you were reading all the studies and interviewing all the experts for your book.
Well, yes, but I think that there are such a wide variety of symptoms of insomnia. For starters, some people, they can't get to sleep at the beginning of the night. Other people have trouble with frequent wake-ups during night, and still others wake up too early in the morning or simply feel like they haven't slept at all. So what I felt I really needed to do in the beginning was to take the journalism training that I'd had and go out and just find a bunch of different people suffering from insomnia and find out what their experience was. So I could, kind of decide for myself, what are the things that most people with insomnia need to know about in order to improve their sleep.
Okay. So I think that's a good one too, to just introduce people with insomnia. So how some of the basic symptoms, and then how you actually get diagnosed with the condition insomnia.
Okay, well, medically, you have to have trouble sleeping, as I said, at the beginning, in the middle, or end of the night for at least 3 times a week for at least 3 months, and then suffer some type of impairment during the daytime. So that might be physical impairment. For example, you feel tired, exhausted, or lacking in stamina. It could be emotional impairment. You're kind of low mood or depressed, or on the other hand, it possibly could be that you're easy to anger, so you lose your temper a lot. And then finally, it could be also that you suffer from cognitive symptoms. You find yourself, you're just unable to think very well, or to learn, or to remember things. So some type of trouble sleeping at night combined with some type of impairment during the day.
Okay. And the diagnosis then, that's just made by your family doctor, or do you have to go to a sleep clinic to actually have it confirmed?
No, actually, that's something that people are a little bit mixed up about, and it's easy to see why. We think of sleep studies. Oh, yes, we need a sleep study to diagnose insomnia. Well, actually, that's not true. A good sleep expert can give you take a personal history from you, and from your personal history, pretty much decide whether your diagnosis is insomnia or whether it might be something else, such as sleep apnea, or perhaps it's a circadian rhythm disorder. And if sleep apnea is suspected, then you will be sent to a sleep lab to take an overnight sleep study.
Okay, so that's, I guess, what I'm hearing here is that's quite a common differential diagnosis where a doctor might think you've either got insomnia or you might be falling into the sleep apnea category, and each one is dealt differently.
Absolutely, yeah. If sleep apnea is suspected, then you probably will be sent to a sleep lab to have a sleep study. Whereas if your diagnosis might be closer to insomnia, it would be sort of beside the point to go in for a sleep study because they can't really tell much more than a doctor's able to ascertain from a good sleep history.
Because I think an easy one to think of, maybe I'll need to get someone on to clarify with all the different sleep apneas, but when I think of sleep apnea, I think of someone who snores a lot, or a partner says they can hear them stop breathing in the night, and an insomnia person shouldn't be giving those kind of symptoms. A partner wouldn't report that, would they? Or they could, I guess. Maybe you could have both. It could be tricky.
Well, yes. There are some people with what they call comorbid. I don't know. I like the term dual diagnoses better. But yeah, there are some people who have both insomnia and sleep apnea. But a person who has insomnia probably wouldn't, for example, be very sleepy during the daytime. With sleep apnea, sleep is being interrupted consistently through the night. And so one symptom of sleep apnea would be feeling so tired that you'd be dropping off or nodding off to sleep during the day. Okay. People with insomnia, on the other hand, are said to experience hyperarousal. So even if they haven't gotten a good night's sleep, they tend to be they tend not to be dropping off during the daytime.
Okay, that's interesting. So someone who says they, in a way, that they struggle to sleep and they're not getting enough sleep isn't falling asleep during the day.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they do these things called multiple sleep latency tests where they give a person multiple sleep opportunities during the daytime. And what they find is that if a person is suffering from sleep apnea, that person will probably readily fall asleep at all those different times. But people with insomnia are probably less likely to fall asleep during the day.
Okay, fascinating. So you mentioned that there's different types of insomnia. I guess there's lots of them, or is there not too many?
Well, what they've tried to do, because insomnia is kind of a nebulous category at this time, what they've tried to do is categorize or make different types of insomnia based on people's symptoms, not based on any kind of objective test that you can give to people who have insomnia. Now, there is one exception to that, and that is taking the case of paradoxical insomnia and psychophysiological insomnia. Those are two different types. And those are often distinguished by actually sending a person into the sleep lab. There are people who might come into the doctor's office reporting that they get maybe 1 hour of sleep every night. Well, that would pretty much be impossible. But it's their perception that they only get 1 hour of sleep a night. And so if they would go in for a sleep study, more than likely, what they would find is that they're actually sleeping a full night, but it's their perception of sleeping only 1 hour versus the objective reading of the polysomnograph, which would show a huge discrepancy between their own perception and what it looks like their brain is doing to a machine. Mm-hmm. So in that case, people would be diagnosed with paradoxical insomnia. And it's not clear how that develops. Some of the standard treatments for insomnia are not as effective usually for paradoxical insomnia. The other more common type of insomnia is called psychophysiological insomnia. And in that, a person's perceptions are more likely to reflect with more accuracy the actual objective sleep as determined by the polysomnograph.
Okay, so someone who feels they're struggling to sleep and it seems extreme, like you said, they think, oh, I'm only sleeping an hour a night. That's the paradoxical one that potentially, and then the psychophysiological format is when you're a little bit more accurate as to how much you're actually sleeping.
Yeah. People are still, people with insomnia are notoriously inaccurate when it comes out to figuring out how much they're sleeping. But there is one category of, I think they're calling it short sleep, actually. When people get, say, 5 hours or less, sometimes short sleep is defined as 6 hours or less. But these are people who get substantially less sleep than the average person who's sleeping 7 or 8 hours a night. And some people have described this as the most severe type of insomnia. And I'll just let it go there.
Okay.
Really, the truth is that they haven't figured out exactly the different categories of insomnia yet.
Well, like you said, it's I guess objectively it's difficult for them. So to me, it sounds more like the psychiatric world where they have to look at other types of reported symptoms and try categorize someone like that.
Right. Yeah. Right. They are doing a lot of genetic research now that will eventually, hopefully, lead to the different underlying factors in the different types of insomnia. But right now, they're not there yet.
Okay. And insomnia is different to a light sleeper. So someone who is easily aroused at night because they say they don't sleep deeply. Are they actually an insomnia person? Or are they just a light sleeper? Is there a difference there?
Yeah. To my understanding now, the non-restorative sleep category is still considered a type of insomnia, I believe. So there are some people that I interviewed who had gone through sleep studies and been told that they didn't get a lot of deep sleep, that they always were hovering in the lighter stages of sleep. And those are the harder cases, I think. Those are for sleep experts to handle.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind, then is there a quick way to sort of give us an overview of the phases of sleep so people have a reference point when you're talking about sleep?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So it feels, I guess, to normal sleepers like you just fall asleep at the beginning of the night and then you wake up in the morning. But actually, we go through about 4 or 5 different cycles a night, where we're starting out, we're moving into the lighter stages of sleep, and then moving into deeper sleep. And for the first half of the night, we're getting quite a bit of deep sleep. But we're always then coming back up to the lighter stages and going into REM sleep, the type of sleep that is often associated with dreaming. And then we're going back again into the lighter stage of non-REM sleep, going into the deep sleep again, and coming up into lighter phases and into REM sleep. So we get most of our deep sleep at the beginning of the night and most of our REM sleep, our dream sleep, toward the end of the night.
Okay. And as you said, even a person with insomnia, they're not actually awake, laying in bed for 8 hours and only sleeping the 1 hour. They are drifting off. They just don't realize it.
Well, it's very interesting because they now have very sophisticated tests where they can kind of take movies of processes that are going on in people's brains. And they used to think of sleep and waking as sort of whole brain states, where sleep was a state in which the whole brain was turned off, and waking, your whole brain was turned on. But now they discovered that in people who have insomnia, inside their brains, most of the brain can be sleeping, and there is not evidence of lots of processing of glucose happening. But certain key points or certain key areas of the brain may still be behaving as though they're awake. So it's kind of a hybrid, kind of almost a hybrid state.
Okay, so yeah, I guess that's they're looking at that. There are certain sections of the brain that aren't going through the phases, and that's what's causing a part of the issues here.
Right.
So could you just explain with that to people the difference between sleep quality and sleep quantity?
Okay. Well, oftentimes people have the idea, that we're not sleeping enough, that we're just our nights are too short. But what may be the case is just that people are not experiencing a very high sleep quality. It may be the case that people are sleeping enough at night, but that their sleep quality is somehow being impaired. And so after well, let's see, how can I say this? A short night, if your sleep is full of deep sleep and you're getting sufficient REM sleep, even a shorter night can feel very, very good. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you go through a treatment for insomnia, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. One thing you may discover is that you don't need as much sleep as you thought you did, but what you like is getting a higher quality sleep when you are asleep.
So what do you think when you mention those phases of sleep, what is it that gives us the quality feeling?
Well, it's often said that, or in the past, it was often said that it's that deep sleep, the amount of deep sleep that we're getting.
So that first part you mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah. The first, the deep sleep that happens during the first part of the night. But now there's also a lot of research on the last part of the night, which is during REM sleep. And it looks like people who wake up a lot during REM sleep are not getting proper REM sleep. And that, too, can lead to the sensation of not having quality sleep.
Okay.
So it seems that both types of sleep in sufficient quantity and certainly of high quality are necessary to make a good night's sleep.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking in my own brain now that it sounds like for us to feel like we've slept well, all the brain needs to go through a process, and it's through the different phases of sleep that it needs to go through that process. And the problem here is that sometimes it's not all the brain that goes through it, and it doesn't maybe go through everything, and that's where the quantity debate's coming about.
Yeah, I mean, I should say though that there's no objective way to measure quality.
Yeah,
quality is a completely subjective judgment that we make about a night's sleep.
Okay, that's fascinating. So the sleep clinics are really just more assessing quantity and depth, or the phases, and that's how they.
Yeah, exactly. They can assess, the quantity of sleep. They can assess something called sleep efficiency, how much of the time that you're in bed you're actually sleeping. They can assess something called sleep onset latency, where you're assessing how long does it take a person to get to sleep actually. They can assess many things, but they can't assess sleep quality.
Okay, that's fascinating. So then, talking about quality, and I think a common one is that people might think, "Oh, I'm either a lark or an owl, so I'm either a morning person or a night person." Is that Do you think that's the case, that there are morning people and night people?
Oh, well, first of all, most people would fall neither in the lark area or the owl area. Most people are, the alternation of daylight and darkness on Earth suits them perfectly well because they get up maybe around 7 in the morning and go to bed around 11 in the evening, and they're perfectly happy with the way things are set up. There are, however, some people who have an earlier time of naturally waking up, and they naturally also want to go to bed earlier in the evening. And then there are the other kind, the owls, the night owls, who really would like to sleep until 10:30 in the morning and maybe go to sleep around 2 or 3 in the morning. So those people are having a hard time of it fitting into the 9 to 5 world.
And so, because what I find interesting there is to think would those people then potentially be insomniacs themselves because they aren't going with the body clock time, the day-night cycle, as you mentioned, the circadian rhythm?
Well, insomnia in their case would be a symptom only. And I think it's important not to confuse this type of situation with the situation of insomnia. The night owl can easily sleep a full night if he or she is given the opportunity to sleep whenever he or she wants to, right? And so where the problem comes in is in people who, so they need to get up for an 8 o'clock class in the morning, or they need to get to work by 7 o'clock. Then that's a problem because they don't want to go to bed until 2 or 3 in the morning, and they've got to get up at 6 or 7. That's not enough sleep. So there's a name for those type of disorders, and they're called circadian rhythm disorders. And in the case of somebody who's getting up late in the morning and going to bed late at night, that is called delayed sleep phase syndrome. And there are a couple of therapies for that are unique to circadian rhythm disorders, and they certainly wouldn't work for people diagnosed with insomnia disorder.
Okay, because that's what I find interesting thinking of night owls, where people think I don't feel sleepy until very late, so I might as well just keep working through the nights, but then they struggle to wake up in the morning.
Right.
And some family members might think, oh, you're struggling with insomnia, then you can't fall asleep, can you? And that's the kind of terminology that's used.
Right. Well, there's sometimes a confusion between insomnia, the symptom of insomnia, and a lot of different disorders have that same symptom, and the disorder of insomnia. And those are oftentimes used interchangeably, but in fact, it's not the case, at least if you look into the world of medicine.
Yeah, okay, that's good for people to. I know a lot, especially in the world of medicine, they have a definition of a word, but colloquially or within society, we use those words loosely, and it's not quite as accurate. Yeah, so it creates confusion, and someone might go to the doctor and then say, "Oh, I've got insomnia," and they're thinking, "No, that's not technically insomnia." So it's good for people to know that, I think.
Well, and when the general practitioner will take the history, one of the first questions he or she would ask would be, well, what time do you go to bed? And if the person consistently is saying 3 or 3:30 in the morning, then that kind of tips the doctor off that, what this person has may not be insomnia. It may be a circadian rhythm disorder instead.
Okay, but we're going to get on to remedies, and I'll keep on to that circadian thought in that part.
Okay.
But before we leave sort of sleep quality, sleep quantity, I also want to ask about the sleeping techniques out there. Like quite popular one is polyphasic sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Have you come across that concept of just sleeping in short bouts at
Right. I think probably any kind of sleep scientist would laugh you off the block if you mentioned that to them, because there's absolutely nothing about the way the body behaves that would suggest that polyphasic sleep would be a good thing for human beings. In some societies, okay, so actually, if you put people in isolation from any kind of time cues, if you put them in a cave where there's no light or no telephones or no indication of what time it is, what will happen is that their body clock will show two dips in core body temperature. The first dip comes normally about an hour to 3 hours before normal wake-up time, and the second dip comes in the afternoon. You've maybe heard it called the circadian dip. That's the reason why, say, in the middle of the afternoon, you suddenly just feel like, oh my gosh, I need a cup of coffee, because you can't think of a name or remember a phone number or whatever. That's not because you've eaten too big a meal at lunchtime. It's because your body temperature has fallen. And so the biggest dip in core body temperature is right before you wake up, pretty much. The second biggest dip is during the middle of the day. And so some people, because we tend to be sleepy, and the most sleepy during the times when our temperature is low, there have been some cultures where the afternoon siesta has been part of the day, a normal part of the day. And so if we can call that polyphasic sleep, there is some legitimacy to saying, okay, that is a suitable sleep-wake situation for human beings. But anything like sleeping for 2 hours and being up for 5 hours and sleeping for 2 hours and being up for 5 hours, it just wouldn't be possible, because, as I say, when we're most inclined to sleep is when our body temperature is down, and it's only down really 2 times during the 24-hour cycle.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So, yeah, because people would think of the Mediterranean or hot climates where people take a siesta like the 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and
right.
But I guess some people also think, oh, if I have a nap in the afternoon, then I can't sleep at night, and that's a problem too. But if you've got a strong circadian rhythm, a strong body clock, then you should actually still be able to get a good quality sleep when you do fall asleep when it gets dark again.
Well, I think that people are still doing research on naps. One thing does seem to be true is that like a 10-minute or 20-minute power nap or something can increase your alertness then later in the day. But if you have insomnia, one of the recommended therapies is called sleep restriction. And it's suggested, you're advised to steer clear of naps, at least during the therapeutic process, because you don't want to fall into deep sleep during a nap. Now, normally you wouldn't if you kept the nap less than, say, 30 minutes. But during therapy anyway, you're asked to refrain from napping.
Okay. So if we then maybe look into some of the causes of insomnia, are we born with insomnia, or is insomnia is something that can develop at any stage due to a variety of reasons?
Well, that is a hard question to answer. I mean, they are starting to find certain genes that are associated with insomnia. It does seem to be that certain people are predisposed to have insomnia. Just stepping away from insomnia for a minute and going back to circadian rhythm disorders. Those disorders are 100% genetically based. As for insomnia, I think probably the most widely accepted view is that there's a certain genetic predisposition, but then also it's also affected by your experience, and it may be affected somewhat more by early childhood experience. in any case, it seems that any type of severe stress, for example, losing a family member or losing a job or something like that, can precipitate insomnia. And then once it's going, some people are very resilient, and when the stress has sort of died away, they're able to return to sleeping in a normal way. But some of us are not able to do that. And once you realize you are sleeping poorly, you might start to worry about that. And then that worry sort of triggers arousal in your body. And before you know it, you're on this vicious circle of basically worry about sleep, anxiety about sleep, and physiological arousal. And so that's going to tend to perpetuate your insomnia.
Yeah, it's very true. And that's where you were mentioning the hyper arousal theory, I believe, with insomnia.
Yes.
And I guess a lot of people might be able to relate. You listen to this, and what you said was stressful events where the loss of a job, bankruptcy, a divorce, a bereavement, and people then, as you mentioned, they're mentally thinking of a problem, or they can't, and that's probably something they will say, I can't turn my mind off. And so because I can't turn my mind off, I can't fall asleep. And then I struggle to sleep, and I just lay there thinking of stuff. And that is sort of taking you along into that spectrum of insomnia, would you say?
Yes, exactly. That seems to be how it develops. Now, I think some sleep experts would argue that it's perhaps more physiological than we realize at this time. But I don't think anybody would argue that it is solely based in biology. I think there is a combination of biology, psychological factors, environmental factors, and sort of acute situational factors that are involved.
Yeah. So when we're looking at the causes, as you mentioned, there's different components to this that someone could assess. And like anything in health, if they all click in the right place for your personal physiology, your N equals 1, then it might activate the trouble sleeping. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So then if we sort of look at, before we go on to remedies, the one point I liked in an interview I was listening with you was talking about coffee, and I guess that's a common thing too, where people say, oh no, you just drink too much coffee in a day and that's why you can't go to sleep at night. You've got a good answer to that.
Well, it turns out that it's not so simple, really. People who are predisposed to insomnia do tend to be people who are more sensitive to coffee than others. And by the way, that is also another thing that is completely genetically determined, your sensitivity to coffee. Some people can drink it after dinner and have a perfectly fine night of sleep afterwards. But coffee is like other drugs. It enters your system and it affects you, increases your arousal and alertness for a certain period of time, and then your body starts to dispose of it. And it has a half-life of about 5 or 6 hours on average, but that can vary depending on your age, and mostly depending on your age. But also depending on other things, such as if you're pregnant or if you, I believe, smoke, actually. In any case, coffee, when it's drunk in the morning, is often not a problem for people with insomnia, because by the time the nighttime rolls around, your body has long processed that coffee and it's out of your system. Mm-hmm. However, it's really, maybe I should just leave it at that, because it is very, very an individual type of thing. One thing I will say, though, is that you shouldn't be drinking too much coffee, and you certainly should try to keep your coffee drinking to the earlier part of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the common, I guess, advice a lot of people would give is don't drink it too late in the day, because if you think of it, the point there is if you think of it chemically, that it's got a half-life, so it's active for a period of time in your system. So,
Right.
even though it's interesting how I've got family members who actually find if they drink a cup of coffee, then they sleep better. So, and it's one of those. It's one of those strange things again. So
yeah. Well, it's a genetic thing, I think.
Yeah.
Completely.
So that sort of takes me into the remedy side of things now when we're talking about chemicals and half-life. So if maybe we should start there as common sleep remedies. So people struggling to sleep, and they've gone to their doctor. They probably are the reason they go to their doctor is probably because they're looking for a sleep aid, like a sleeping pill of some sort. Do you have any sort of comments about sleeping pills for people who struggle to sleep with insomnia?
Right now, that's not considered the first line treatment for people who have insomnia. There's something, I mentioned it earlier, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And that is sort of a treatment comprising several different components. There are some changes in habits that are recommended. Something called sleep restriction therapy, which sounds onerous actually to people with insomnia, but well, I can tell you that it was one of the things that has helped me the most. There's something called stimulus control therapy, which basically tells you that you need to stay out of the bedroom and out of the bed except during sleep. There's also a cognitive component to cognitive behavioral therapy, where things like misguided beliefs about sleep or fears are basically challenged, and so you come out with a more realistic and more positive frame of mind after you undergo this therapy, and then relaxation is a part of it as well. So it's a treatment that comprises several different components, but it is known to be very effective for people who have insomnia. In fact, I think the figures run about 70 to 80% of the people who go through cognitive behavioral therapy actually end up with improvements to their sleep.
Oh, fantastic. So that's already a great tip for people who are struggling, is not to think of, I need a sleeping pill, is actually to inquire about cognitive behavioral therapy as the first line attempt.
As I understand it, it's not widely available, and I don't know. I think you're in the UK, and I'm not sure how widely available it is there. But normally it can be administered by trained doctors, nurses, therapists. There are many different types of people who get training in it.
Okay. Yeah, I did like your point about restricting your sleep. So as someone who's gone through insomnia and suffers with it, is that what happens where people would just want to go lay down, but they're not sleeping, but that's a problem that you're just laying down? And so what a part of the behavioral training is to say, don't even just go do that. It's sort of like you need to train yourself that when you go lay down in the bedroom, that's sleep time, not just rest.
Yeah. That's right. Okay. Yeah. One strategy that some people will adopt when they see they're not sleeping well is to actually go to bed earlier. Well, that's just going to exacerbate the insomnia. Sleep restriction, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to start by staying in bed only the amount of time that you're actually asleep. When you're in the bed, you want to be sleeping, and you don't want to be awake. So it's a therapy where you restrict your sleep in the beginning rather more than you would choose to. But slowly, as your sleep becomes more regular, and as you find yourself going to sleep exactly when your head hits the pillow, that sleep window, that very narrow sleep window, starts being widened a bit. And eventually, as you go through the process, you basically come and find what is your ideal amount of sleep, your ideal sleep window. And if you can continue to observe that sleep window every day or as many days as possible, then your sleep becomes it becomes much easier to fall asleep and stay asleep through the night.
Interesting. So yeah, that's a great little health tip for people there. I'm just thinking, so it is a good thing in that case where you're when you're struggling with sleep is to set a clock in the morning, but more because you're going to keep yourself consistent when you wake up in the day, and there's going to be a consistency for going to bed at the day, and you've got to think of it as a window. So don't make it too long, otherwise it's inefficient.
Right, exactly. You'll find yourself struggling to fall asleep, and you'll also find yourself waking up a lot during the middle of the night, which is not, you don't want any of those things. But I would say that what is most important, really, I think, is establishing a time, a rise time, a time that you're going to be getting up in the morning, and really sticking with that. Sometimes it's hard to do, but what you need to do is to be awake for a long enough time to build up enough sleep pressure that you're going to fall asleep right away and stay sleeping through the rest of the night. So keeping to a firm rise time is possibly the most important thing you can do for your sleep if you suffer from insomnia.
And would you tweak it according to the natural daylight hours, according to the season that you're in? Would you shift it?
Now that's an interesting question.
In your own personal experience,
I'm not sure what sleep experts would say about that. I'm sort of the opinion that you adhere to a pretty rigorous same get up time throughout the year, but you may be naturally inclined to want to do it differently. Well, that's your choice, I guess. Let's say you feel you'd like to get up earlier in the summer because there's more light there. Well, fine. But you want to keep your sleep window, you want to adjust your bedtime then accordingly. So if you're a 6-hour sleeper, you don't suddenly want to be going to bed at the same time you would during the wintertime. During the summertime, you're going to adjust that. You're going to go backwards with that. So instead of going to bed at midnight, say you're going to stay up until 1, something like that.
Yeah, as we've talked a little bit about already, is body clock and circadian rhythms, and I don't know, I'm in that place right now. I'm always thinking of circadian thoughts too when it comes to things, and how it is shifting and seasonal, and depending what latitude you are in the world. So but when we're coming then more into sort of remedies here, so we talked about that, but I think light and food is another two other points I want to talk about. And so another thing that's affecting people's quality is being exposed to too much blue light at night. Would you agree?
Yes, that can have an effect on sleep. Yes. And that might be especially bad for someone who is a night owl. But it also might affect people with insomnia as well.
Okay. Yeah, actually, Ivan, who's my podcast editor, he'll be listening to this right now, and he has a tendency to work later in the night. And what he's found really good was when I had another guest on who's devised software that makes your screen go red when it's nighttime.
Yes.
And so he found, because he's on the computer, and he found, wow, that actually helped him sleep when the screen automatically went amber and red. So he felt, he could sleep a bit better with that. It allowed him to fall back to sleep again. So
sure. I mean, they do know that it's the shorter wavelengths, the blue light, that are suppressing the secretion of melatonin. And we want to have melatonin being secreted at night because that helps us stay asleep through the night.
Mm-hmm. And
whereas red light doesn't seem to do that.
Yeah. And then food. Have you even looked at food timing when it comes to sleep quality? Have you come across any of that?
I think that here, the research that I've seen has basically centered on regularity as far as insomnia goes. And so there is a debate, for example, another remedy that I've found very helpful for me is exercise. And whether you should exercise in the morning, whether you should exercise in the afternoon, whether in the evening, and so forth. I think that it's an individual thing. When is the exercise time that would be best for each person? Likewise, meals. I think that basically anybody who's done research on meal times has found that it seems to be the regularity of the meal times as opposed to early meal times or late meal times or something like that, that seems to promote better sleep. And likewise with exercise, it's the regularity of it that seems to be helpful to sleep.
And you mentioned melatonin too. Melatonin supplements are very popular. Do you have an opinion on them?
Well, they're not generally prescribed for people with insomnia because those are called, they're not sleeping pills, they're called chronobiotics. Those are helpful for people who have circadian rhythm disorders.
Okay.
And also helpful, they may be helpful for people who do shift work. They're also melatonin is also helpful for jet lag, but it typically won't be prescribed for people with insomnia.
That's interesting. So someone with insomnia might not feel the benefits of taking a melatonin supplement.
It's my understanding that the only people who might, a person might not be secreting enough melatonin, and that might happen if you were an older adult and your pineal gland had partially calcified, for example. But I don't believe this is a situation that's very common. But if that were the case, if your body had ceased to produce enough melatonin, then taking a supplement would be recommended by a doctor.
Okay.
But melatonin is not a sleeping pill. It will change the timing of your sleep, but it won't change your ability to get to sleep or stay asleep,
okay.
Basically.
Okay, it just comes back to the timing effect again.
Yeah.
And other sleep aids, I'm thinking of blackout curtains, wearing sleep masks, earplugs, white noise. There's other sort of stimuluses that people look to help them fall asleep. I'm sure You've experimented with lots of different ones too, yourself.
Well, I just know that I'm very sensitive to noise, and so most of the time I'm wearing earplugs at night. But I've also met people who are sensitive to light. And so I've heard people wrap their heads in towels or put, light blocking curtains on their windows. I think you need to, I think it's pretty clear. People can pretty clearly identify those types of,
factors that
type of stimulation from the environment that is a problem for them and take some steps to, get rid of that.
And even for someone with insomnia, again, these other environmental stimulants that you mentioned before when we were talking about the causes, and there's lots of different parts to this, that it's something even someone with insomnia could look to address is their sleep area, and that it doesn't have too much light or any light or noises.
Sure, that it's quiet. That can be hard especially if you don't have much money.
Yeah.
That can be hard to get a noise-free environment.
And that's where the earplugs come in as a quick.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And white noise, any sort of opinion on that, on the white noise effect?
I think I always tell people do whatever works. If that works for you, then great. I hate that stuff. I can't have any noise. And so,
okay.
I won't let my sister, if I have to sleep in the same room, I won't let my sister put her white noise machine on.
Yeah, because that is the thing where I'm just thinking of some people who find, I'm struggling to sleep, so I'll go lay in front of the TV just so it's got just a noise or something. And that's what helps me drift off.
Yeah. I mean, it can help people drift off. I used to play, I don't know, probably not in the UK, but in the United States, there was a nature program called Marty Stauffer's Wild America. And it was a nature program where there was kind of a naturalist who would come on and talk about all these different animals, and you'd see pictures of these animals. And that used to kind of be good for me. But I think that the best thing for people with insomnia is to realize that in the absence of any kind of sleep aid like that, you can sleep if you make your sleep regular and have the right habits and have the right frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just see with our time, we're coming up on our recording time, but I want to talk a little bit about your book. Your book it's titled for insomnia, but anyone who's looking to even just optimize their sleep, they could get benefit from your book.
I would say that anybody who has the symptom of insomnia and might either be diagnosed as with insomnia or with a circadian rhythm disorder. I have a whole chapter on that.
Fantastic.
And also people could get benefit if they have a comorbid disorder, say depression or anxiety or something like that. Those are the kind of people that I was hoping to reach with my book.
Well, I think that's a lot of people actually who would have that and who are struggling to sleep.
Sure.
Yeah. And you give a lot of helpful tips in there too, and other resources, don't you?
I do, yeah. There are some online sources of help for sleep, and there are some good books. I mean, I always recommend my own book for people, but I also recommend others. Mm-hmm. There's a good book called The Insomnia Workbook, another one called The Insomnia Answer. Those are very helpful.
Okay, fantastic. I think you've given us a real good education about sleep. Lots of aspects about sleep, from diagnosis to causes and symptoms and remedies. We went through quite a bit today, and I love it that also we got to talk about body clocks and circadian rhythms. And sorry that I maybe went on a bit with some of that, but yeah, it's just something I've got a real keen interest in. What are the best ways that someone can keep in contact with you or follow your work other than getting your book? Do you have online social media or website that people can go to?
I have a website. It's called The Savvy Insomniac. And I have, for the last 5 years, been blogging every week. So that is probably the best way to get in touch with me and find out, what I'm writing about these days. I do have a Facebook page called The Savvy Insomniac, and I'm on Twitter. It's at Lois Maharg. I would say that would be the way people should be in touch with what I'm doing.
Okay, so you're still keeping up to date, is what I'm hearing too, with sleep, by blogging about lots of regular articles, so people can keep up to date with where you're going.
I'm going to now be changing the blog into an occasional blog, maybe once a month. But for 5 years now, I can hardly believe it's been that long. Wow. I have been writing weekly blogs
about sleep and anything about sleep.
Insomnia, if you can believe anybody would do that.
Okay, well, I think that's a great library resource then for anyone who wants to geek out a little bit more about insomnia then.
That's right.
Thank you. All right, so I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all your knowledge, and I really found it super useful.
Okay, thanks so much for having me, Gary. I really appreciate this opportunity.